to this computer. That's
Recording in
always my
progress.
problem. And then I have to go find the recordings. So,
So do you want me to back out of here and go back to the full screen with you now?
all right.
All
All
right.
right. So, Sarah, it's
Yep.
all yours. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to try to share my screen. So here we go. Fingers crossed. Let's see. Screen, start broadcast. 3, 2, 1. Da, 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 da. How's that, Lauren?
Perfect.
Okay. Oh boy. Okay. Well, thanks for coming on a beautiful Saturday morning. I'm going to talk about some of the problems we're facing here in Chatham and the incredible data set that's been collected by the Chatham Water Watchers. These are volunteers. Um, and then talk a little bit, well, about the data and then some of the future problems we're facing, which I'm sure you're quite understanding and aware of. So from a 2009 presentation, this quote jumped out at me. I mean, it's already been known. Nitrogen-related water quality declines represents one of the most serious threats to the ecological health of nearshore coastal waters. So that nitrogen, it's not mercury, it's not, anything else right now. It's primarily the nutrients that are the contaminants in our coastal zone. So here's the outline of my presentation. I'm going to talk a little bit about groundwater on Cape Cod, and we'll learn that everything is connected. I want to talk a bit about why we value our coastal lands, talk about eutrophication, a term that some of you are familiar with, and then the types of data that the volunteers collected. Then finally, the map of stations and the data. So it's really cool, and talk some conclusions, and then how we protect our stressed out ecosystems. So let's jump in. Here's the groundwater on Cape Cod. We are a sole source aquifer. So what that means is there's only one real body of water that lies under our feet here. And from that body of water, we draw all our drinking water. We also send all of our septic. If we have a septic system, all of our septage goes into that water. If we put fertilizer on our plants, all of that goes into the water. And this dirt underneath us is fairly unconsolidated sand. So what goes into the system moves through it rather quickly compared to most places. So on average, and this is really an average, water in our ground moves from the highlands down to our coastal zones about 1 foot per day. And you can think of that and expand it out. So it's about a mile every 14 and a half years, give or take a couple years. Everything that we put in, it drains to the sea. We don't have a river that takes our stuff away. It all goes to the sea eventually here. And the speed can vary depending on clay layers. It can move slower or faster. But also for some organic molecules, you can, and personal care products like shampoos or pharmaceuticals that go also into our septic systems, transformations can occur on the way through bacterial degradation. Ponds are simply a surface expression of the groundwater table. If you extend it into the ground, that's our groundwater right there at the edge of the lake as it plunges into our dirt. And I wanted to say that our bays all along our coastal zones are less salty because of this ongoing input of fresh water. So nitrogen, we're talking about nitrogen today. And where's it come from? Well, it comes from the atmosphere, but 80% of the nitrogen in our groundwater that's reaching our bays comes from our septic systems here in the Cape. We are literally using our groundwater as a common to discard our waste. Some also comes from fertilizers, maybe anywhere from 5 to 15% from fertilizers. Animal waste makes up some, and then there's natural sources. I also think that the nitrogen that's now stuck in the sediments in our embayments, that nitrogen that's in the sediments also in the bottom of our bays acts as a source as well. So that's leaching out into the overlying water. So what's the value of our Cape Cod coastal area? What is the value of it? And it's interesting because we love we live here because we love this area. And something that came up about 30 years ago was this concept of ecosystem services. And it's basically, what can the ecosystem do? What does it provide us as humans? What does it give us? So there's a lot of different boxes that our ecosystem here tick off. And I'm going to talk about that and why it's so important to preserve our coastal areas, so they provide those incredible ecosystem services to us. Another way to look at it, though, is how the bay takes care of us. I mean, it really does. It provides all sorts of things to us for free. These are the things it provides. It's incredible protection against the storms and sea level rise that we see today. The marshes, the tidal flats, the dunes all protect us from storms, from tidal surges, from it also collects all the runoff from our surface, and it acts as a filter before the water actually reaches the coastal zone. So it's an incredible filter. Also, oh, where's Zena? There she is. So she protects us. Our coastal zone really protects us. And I wanted to mention that Hurricane Sandy, where in New Jersey there was a lot of intact marshlands, the area behind those marshlands fared much better, and there was much more saved compared to areas that did not have intact historical areas where there was historical marshlands and eelgrass beds. Those areas saw more destruction. So this area is incredible nursery as well. And the eelgrass beds and the marshlands provide refuge and habitat for all sorts of creatures to multiply. What you see here is just a little baby scallop. We used to have lots of scallops in our eelgrass beds, and they're kind of like the canary in the coal mine. We don't see them, say, in Stage Harbor so much. You'll see them periodically in Pleasant Bay in some areas, but once that they were plentiful and made up a fishery, they're not here. And also 70% of our fishery species actually start in this coastal area. And so protecting it and preserving it supports our economic engine here. Also, carbon storage. These areas are one of the most carbon-rich areas on Earth. Mangrove forests are the most carbon dense, but what our coastal marshes do is they trap carbon, and they actually capture it as a sink. It doesn't get up into the atmosphere. It stays in and gets buried. So right now, even though it represents a very small amount of our coastline, those areas are incredibly dense carbon sinks right now. So preserving them keeps that carbon in check instead of having it be in the atmosphere. And then finally, we all know recreation, tourism, inspiration for poets, artists. It really is an important part of our life on Cape, and anybody who's here in the summer is very familiar with the tourists that come by here. But personally, I like the winter because it's just so darn beautiful. It's an inspiration. So these are all the reasons and the ecosystem services that our coastline gives us. And again, these ecosystem services, they're free. necessarily paying for them. It would happen anyways. So what is the value of a healthy coastal ecosystem? What do we get? We get those, protection, nursery. We've got the carbon storage. We've got tourism here on the Cape. But what we sort of forget is that we are an intrinsic part of the ecosystem. We are a very important part of the ecosystem. We affect it, it affects us, but we're really affecting it right now. And I think, culturally it's important, socially it's an important, economically, but also religiously. I mean, what it inspires in us is probably beyond measure. And I just wanted to mention that many American indigenous tribes felt that, or believe now, that they are part of this earth, and that the coastal zones and everything on it are an extension of themselves. So they thought of the coastal zone sort of as a generous cousin, but also part of them. So by being part of them, it was, what you did to disturb an area, you were disturbing yourself. So it's a different way of thinking about things, but they are free. We need to protect them. They're part of us. So let's get into it. Eutrophication. The term eutrophic comes from the Greek, which means well-nourished. Eutrophic. And what has come to mean in terms now is that it's overnourished. It means there's too much food. And that's the nitrogen. It serves as a fertilizer. And this excess nutrient that comes into our harbors, they impact our bays. And this is just a picture of a continuum of symptoms, going from no symptoms, no problem, a good, healthy system, to highly impacted system. And what you see is initially, with more input of nutrients, you get the plants growing. These microscopic phytoplankton grow profusely. That creates a shading of the seagrass below, and the seagrass depends on sunlight to grow. So it's cutting off the sunlight. Loss of water clarity, and then you continue on and you start using up oxygen as that phytoplankton and materials drop to the seabed and then start being decomposed by bacteria. The bacteria uses up the oxygen, dissolved oxygen that's in the water. Important component of the ecosystem. Everything needs oxygen. So then you get loss of submerged aquatic vegetation. That would be the eelgrass. You get low dissolved oxygen. You get possibly toxic blooms. And at the very end, you can have, fish kills. You see loss of habitat. We've seen, 55% of our eelgrass beds in Pleasant Bay area gone. Also, you can have some human health risks, bacterial growth, and closed fishing grounds. So anyways, that's eutrophication of a water body. And say out by Monomoy, where you've got the Atlantic Ocean, you've got probably no problem. It's really healthy waterway. But some of those, what I call terminal ponds, or they call terminal ponds, like Riders Cove or Mill Pond, you see a more highly impacted area from eutrophication. Okay, let's do a little science. Nitrogen. 80% of our air that we breathe is nitrogen. It's in a form that's very inert. It's not bioavailable. It's just kind of there, and it's not chemically reacting with a lot. There are bacteria that actually take that nitrogen and can fix it into a form that is then bioavailable. And the bioavailable species are in this little black circle. So these ammonia, nitrite, nitrate are forms that are extremely bioavailable. They're rapidly taken up across a cell surface by phytoplankton. All the little dots you see on this page are bacteria. So bacteria, they do a lot of different jobs. They can fix it. They can denitrify. They can take that available nitrogen and they can turn it back into inert nitrogen gas, N2. But also as phytoplankton get broken down, you get decomposition products that also contain nitrogen. So let's talk a little bit more about that. These are the forms of data that we have. These are the forms of nitrogen that the water watchers have collected in the water and then analyzed at UMass Dartmouth. As I said, the DIN, the dissolved inorganic nitrogen, that is the bioavailable form. That's rapidly taken up. Then once that nitrogen is in particles, it's called PON, particulate organic nitrogen, and that's nitrogen in phytoplankton, bacteria, et cetera. And then those things break down, they're dissolved, they fall apart, and what you have is dissolved organic nitrogen. This amino acids, for example, small compounds, proteins, and humics. And then you have total nitrogen, which is a combination additive of all these different forms of nitrogen. So let me just tell you a little bit brief history of sort of how the water watchers took off. I first want to mention that important thing happened in '87, which was the Pleasant Bay watershed was designated as a ACEC. It's a state designation. And this came with a whole host of different laws and regulations and oversight to keep that bay in good shape. It was recognized as a very important watershed. It's the biggest estuary on Cape Cod, so no surprise. There isn't a similar protection, however, for the Stage Harbor or south-facing waters in Chatham, except oversight by the town, and of course, just the regular rules and regulations from state and feds. But so that oversight, is very important, and the people that serve on the committees that do the oversight are important to our town. So sometime around in the 90s, the water quality monitoring efforts became spearheaded by Friends of Chatham Waterways, FCW, and they started harping on the Town of Chatham Natural Resources group and saying, we really need oversight of our waterways. You can see that things are disappearing. It's not as clear. The eelgrass beds are going, and it was really Bob Duncanson that they harped on, and he was like, no, it's a huge program. And finally, he was convinced, also due to town planning efforts, they identified a significant lack of baseline data. So it made sense for the town to collect data. Here were the volunteers in Chatham Friends of Chatham Waterways pushing for this. And Bob did this incredible effort where he created a quality assurance plan that was accepted by the Environmental Protection Agency to use volunteers to collect data that would then be useful. And who wants to go out and collect a whole bunch of data and have it not done correctly and have it not useful? What a waste of time. So it was really Bob, I'm thinking Carol Ridley as well, who pushed for a very clear protocol and training and good equipment to make this whole thing work. And it's amazing what's come up in the last 25 years. So once it was approved, 1998, 99, the program started. What kind of data did they collect? Dissolved oxygen, temperature, salinity, water transparency, chlorophyll. That's how much phytoplankton. It's a way to measure how much phytoplankton there is in water. Phaeophytin is the breakdown products of chlorophyll. And then, of course, the nitrogen. There's 5 different phases. They also collected phosphorus and particulate organic carbon. Now, on the website, we finally have the data and explanation up on the town website. So I really encourage you to go look at that and look at the data. Take your own time. All right. The objectives were many of this water quality monitoring, but it's basically to create a background baseline. If something's sudden, if there's a sudden change, you want to be able to be monitoring. So you pick up any kind of excess, sudden somebody dumps, bags and bags of fertilizer. Well, you're going to pick that up from the runoff. Also provide the data for policy regulation and educational applications. They used it to model for the sewer system. They used that water quality monitoring data. Also, how good is the sewer working? How good are these different swales that have been built, the different capture basin, sediment capture basin from runoff and floodwaters, so things don't go directly into the bay. What's the efficacy of these efforts? And then if there's big changes in the barrier beach or, now sea level rise or dredging, you can see the potential effects of those. And then now we're really looking at climate change impacts that are going to be coming, changes in temperature, more extreme weather, and toxic blooms. And so having this baseline data allows us to be able to say, hey, it was like this then, and now it's like this. What is causing the degradation, and what do we need to do about it? So attribution is going to be an interesting thing, very important. So here the location of all the sites around Chatham. You can see it circles the whole town. There are 20 to 25 sites. Most are 25 years of data or less. The samplers, those intrepid volunteers, go out 5 times each summer from July through September, early in the morning. It's on an outgoing tide. So what you're measuring at that time is the worst case scenario. You've had all night for the respiration to occur in the sediments in the water column. You haven't had any sunlight powering the powering phytoplankton, which injects oxygen into the water. So it's the worst case scenario. You have your control sites. So these sites are where the water's entering the systems around Chatham, and this is as good as it's going to get. You want to make sure that you understand what the concentration of contaminants are in the water that's entering each of these embayments. So the control sites will be the best water quality. These terminal ponds at the very end represent the worst water quality. Some sites were shallow, so just one sample was collected, and some areas were they collected a surface one and a bottom sample. So I'm going to tell you, finally, we're getting here. These are, I call them water quality stories. We're looking at trends. We're not, these data have not been officially analyzed statistically. So until they are properly analyzed by a professional statistician, you can't say, yes, an area is getting better. Yes, it's staying the same, or it's impacted worse. All you can say is that, wow, it looks like it's getting better, or it's, pretty obvious. But until those statistics are done, you really have to just say these are trends. So I set it up as 4 different systems: the south-facing waterways that go directly into Nantucket Sound, the Stage Harbor system, North Chatham, these terminal ponds, and Frostfish Creek, and then the wonderful Muddy Creek. Now, there's a lot of data, and so one way to sift through all this data and simplify it, so you can really say, hey, is it getting better or worse? There's this measure called a eutrophication index. And this measure has 5 different components to it, and it takes into account all these indicators that show how good the water is. So that includes dissolved oxygen, water transparency, phytoplankton pigments, that's the chlorophyll, the total organic nitrogen. So that's a measure of the nitrogen in decomposing products. And then, of course, that dissolved inorganic nitrogen that is so bioavailable. So all of these things are taken into account and transformed into this eutrophication index. And basically separated into 3 different measures. Is it poor? Is it fair? Is it good water quality? So, but first I'm going to show you some of the graphs that are now on the website and all the data that's been graphed to this point. These were created by Bob Duncanson, and what you see on the left, the site is Nantucket Sound, so it's one of our clean water control sites. It's goes from 1999 into 2023. You can see the eutrophication index is up at 100 to start with in 1999, but it fluctuates. It pretty much stays in the good section. 2008, for some reason, it sort of fell below. 2012, there are some years that things were not as good out in Nantucket Sound. The middle part of the graph on the left-hand side shows your dissolved shows your nitrogen concentrations. The DIN is in gray, the particulate organic nitrogen in white, and then the dissolved organic nitrogen. So you can see the fluctuation there, but it's pretty low, and it's really not too bad. Anyways, the last one at the bottom is a graph of the chlorophyll A and phaeophytin. Those are the pigments that are in the phytoplankton, and it gives you a measure of how much phytoplankton is in the water. On the right side, we have the dissolved oxygen, and you've got 2 graphs. One is in milligrams per liter, and the bottom one is in percent. So 100% represents the amount of oxygen it's in our air today. I mean, that we're breathing. Anything below 100% means that you've got less than can fit in that water body. So it's a saturation. All I want you to see is that the upper right-hand graph, if you look at it, you can see that there is it goes up and down, and that represents sort of the cycles. Things are happening cyclically. Perhaps it was a real drought year, a couple of years in a row. It could be that the Gulf Stream had a big eddy that came in and impacted Nantucket Sound. There's all sorts of things that are creating that low and high oxygen regime. But what I'm going to talk about, getting back to the left-hand side, I'm just talking about the eutrophication index, that upper graph. So here we are. I have Nantucket Sound again, the eutrophication index. This is the water that's out in Nantucket Sound and is entering these south-facing waterways. You've got Taylor's Pond up here. You've got a huge marsh that the water travels through before it gets to Taylor's Pond. You also have very slow flushing. So the water that's in Taylor's Pond, it doesn't get replenished very quickly. So that means that fresh Nantucket Sound water is not replacing that lower water quality water. So you can see Taylor's Pond, it's pretty poor. And it looks like it, to my eye, if you run your eye from the left to the right, it doesn't look like it's really improving. And probably the statistics would show that too. Then go over to Lower Cockle Cove Creek. this drains a huge marsh, and it really doesn't look like it's improving. This area is also a favorite spot for families to bring their little kids because there's a protected beach. That beach on the Cockle Cove Creek side, where Bucks Creek and Cockle Cove meet, has persistent problems with high levels of Enterococcus E. coli. So it's permanently closed because of that. However, people still use the beach. But if you want to look at the nutrients that are feeding that bacteria, you can see that Lower Cockle Cove Creek has really bad water quality. Then you go up the creek, up Bucks Creek, and same thing, not so much improvement, but wow, what's that blue? I don't know what's happening with that one, 2023, but maybe it's good news, but you need many more years to determine whether that's a real trend or not. So that's South Chatham. Let's go to Stage Harbor and up into Oyster Pond. Again, I've got Nantucket Sound eutrophication index on the bottom here, showing how good the water was. So that's what's entering the harbor. Outer Stage Harbor, you can see from 99 to 2023 in the bottom here. It appears to be getting better. I mean, just my eye shows that it went from being fair to it's kind of trying to get better. And then you go up Oyster River to CM1A, and it appears that there's still some effect of that improving water quality. But once you get up to Oyster Pond, not as clear. Oyster Pond is still suffering, although a lot of catchment basins and flood runoff, what do you call them? Things have been built around there to improve, and also the sewering is going to hopefully start showing greater improvement in Oyster Pond. But let's go up the other side. Let's go up the Mill Pond side. So CM3 again is that outer Stage Harbor here at the bottom. And your eye just goes straight up to the top one, which is the innermost Mill Pond. And what you see is what I think is a heartening story. I think that you're definitely seeing improvement as you go into that whole Mill Pond complex. But again, statistics will tell. I just know when I was a kid going up into Mill Pond, it was disgusting, and there are floaters and a lot of you could tell that there was really impacted waterways there. So again, you can see all this data online in the water quality website. So now let's move up and around the corner to North Chatham. Here, the control site is the Chatham Harbor site, which is right in the middle of the harbor. Nickerson's Neck is PBA 20 between Strong Island and the mainland. And then going up into Inner Riders Cove, that's PBA 3, you see things are really not improving as you go up into that terminal pond. However, CM13, possibly something's happening there as the water is coming into Crow's Pond. Maybe it's the sediments that are presently in Riders Cove that are releasing nitrogen and causing that poor water quality. It's going to take a while for things to improve. You go up further north into Crow's Pond, and it just appears that something is happening there. The water quality may be improving, but the last 2 years, not so great. So don't know if this is a spike or a trend. So again, the statistics and more years of collecting will show. Okay, North Chatham Frostfish Creek. This is a new project. So we don't have a whole lot of data, but over the next few years, we'll be seeing more and more data coming in. There isn't much I can say, except you can see the water is impacted, possibly CM14, which is on the water side of 28 Bridge culvert might be improving, but we only have one data point in yellow at the bottom there. So that's Frostfish Creek. These are lands up Frostfish that are owned by the Chatham Conservation Foundation. So they're extremely interested in getting more data. They've been collecting bacterial data for quite a while. So I don't show that here. And now finally, let's go to Muddy Creek, because that was a huge project. They put the new bridge in 2016. And from these two little tiny culverts, suddenly you've got this higher tidal range. You've got much more flushing. It went from, I don't know, flushing in nine days to now it flushes out in a day. So huge difference up there. Big Bay is that PBA 6 just at Frostfish Creek. So you see water quality is definitely improving in that corner of Pleasant Bay. But then as the water goes up into Muddy Creek, you can see that first PBA 5 is improving after the restoration project. But further up, way up, about 3/4 of a mile at PBA 5A, unlikely that you see improvements occurring. So this area further up the creek, it's going to take years and years of flushing and to see any real improvement. You've got so much nitrogen that's stored in the sediments below that that's going to be a continued source. But as sewering continues in Harwich, actually Harwich has made a point of sewering a lot of this area and having it, getting rid of the septic systems, we might see some more improvement over the years. This is a long-term project. I mean, that septage is in the groundwater. It's going to be leaching out into these areas for years to come. So it's going to be a slow process of cleaning out these areas. So that's the data, again, all available on the water laboratory site in the town of Chatham. Again, these are just trends. They're not statistically proven, although there was a study in 2014 by the Cadmus group, just of the Pleasant Bay stations. But what that found is you don't have a whole lot of change in the terminal ponds. So again, flushing affects water quality, the amount of tidal flushing with bringing fresh water and moving out the other stuff. And the groundwater will take time to clear. So if you've got septage moving 1 mile in about 15 years, you can see that it's going to take time as sewering occurs to clean that up. So certain amount of nitrogen will continue to leach from impacted sediments in these terminal ponds. So that's a bummer. South-facing waterways don't see much change. It's possible that even before this area was built up, those areas were impacted and had high bacterial counts because of those large marshes. The Stage Harbor complex, I'm going to say it looks encouraging. We're going to get statistical work done on the data at some time soon, and that'll show whether it really is statistically significant. North Chatham shows some improvement following the new breach, but how long will that last? And then again, you don't see those terminal ponds all the way up into Riders Cove, Upper Muddy Creek, Crow's Pond maybe, but you don't see those improvements extend all the way up into those inner areas. Muddy Creek is in recovery. It's going to take a while for it to still come sort of equilibrate from this new bridge. But the water is definitely getting better in the lower portions. The upper will take time. And then finally, the Stage Harbor complex is really showing encouraging signs of improvement. So, protecting our coastal ecosystems. I just want to impress on you again, the sewering effectively takes nutrients out of the groundwater. And by processing at a sewage treatment plant, you actually denitrify and you turn that nitrogen into N2. So it goes up out of those systems as a gas. And what's released is incredibly low concentrations of nitrogen. So you're really getting rid of that nitrogen by sewering. So I wanted to encourage you all to support the town projects. Anything that protects the salt marshes will protect water quality and vice versa. I think you all know that we need to minimize or stop using fertilizers and pesticides. These things are going directly into our groundwater, and we draw our drinking water from that groundwater, and also they all eventually run it either off from storm runoff or groundwater, eventually reach our beautiful coastal areas. I want to encourage people to landscape for this changing climate that we're going to be dealing with. Use drought resistant species, plant trees that give you shade, and in areas, if you live around waterways, plant up a buffer of native plants so that anything running off your own property gets captured before it goes into a waterway. We're going to see more warming. Warming waters fit less oxygen, so the dissolved oxygen it's going to be a double a whammy on our ecosystems. Sea level rise is going to impact our marshes that are very sensitive to the height of the water. You're also going to be seeing some problems with acidification as more carbon dioxide is injected into the waters. It forms carbonic acid. So you see a pH problem affecting some of the more sensitive shell species. It's hard to grow a shell when you've got acidic waters. And then, of course, we're going to be dealing with extreme weather, be that drought, be that huge storms, hurricanes. With all this CO2 and increased heat, you can fit more water into an air into the atmosphere, and that water drives more extreme weather. Also, get involved with local nonprofits. Chatham Conservation Foundation does a lot of work. Friends of Chatham Waterways, Friends of Pleasant Bay. These groups are doing a lot to make sure that our town is on the right pathway to keep our water quality good. And also become a local water watcher and be part of this whole group of people that collect this data. It's really an impressive program. It's unusual. It's the first time the Environmental Protection Agency approved a QAP, a quality assurance program, that included volunteer citizen scientists. So it was a big deal. And I attribute that to Bob Duncanson. So here's from Wampanoag woman, said a couple years ago, whatever's deposited in the soil is in that water, is in us. So we are all one thing, and we name ourselves after the place that is our nurturing. That sustains our life. So I wanted to acknowledge just the hundreds of volunteers, past and present. I have to say, I go through the data sheets and I find names and people that are no longer with us, and it feels profound. The data that was collected, that if you had paid for that to be collected, it would be millions and millions and millions of dollars. So this is a huge coup on the part of Chatham and Harwich and Orleans and East End. It's a really incredible program. I wanted to thank Betsy Mosser and Bob Samuelson. They're the coordinators, volunteer coordinators for Chatham. And I also wanted to thank the past director of natural resources, Dr. Bob Duncanson. He really got this program started with a lot of prodding, but made it what it is into a really substantial base of our understandings of our coastal coastal problems. I mean, he really got that together. And I wanted to thank Greg Berman also. He's just taken over for Bob, and he's been very open about sharing a lot of the work that we're doing, which is really exciting. And he spearheaded getting this up on the website. Pleasant Bay Alliance has been intimately involved in all of this and has worked out a lot of the statistical work that's been done in Pleasant Bay. Again, Friends of Chatham Waterways, they're our heroes, Friends of Pleasant Bay. And then all of the analyses are done by SMAS down at UMass Dartmouth. They've been running the lab with Brian Howes, who is no longer with us, for years and years, and they've got quite a production. Again, Mass Estuaries Program provide a lot of funding and support. And then the towns of Harwich, Orleans, and Brewster are also involved in making this all work. So in the corner up on the right is a QR code. If you want to take your phone and open it up, it'll take you directly to the water quality page for the town of Chatham. So, and here's somebody measuring the salinity. That's our PBA 8. Anyways, thank you for coming, and I'm open to questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Sarah. We really appreciate all your effort that you've been doing on this water quality testing and the time that you've taken for all these presentations. If anybody has any questions, you could use the raise hand feature, or you could put it in the chat box. Renee says, thank you, Sarah. Great presentation.
Thanks, Renee.
Just unmute yourself if you have a question. All right, not getting any questions.
Hi.
Wait a second. There we go.
Hi, it's Michelle Maloney Kits. Hi, Sarah. Thanks
Hey,
for
Michelle.
a terrific presentation. I have a quick question. So, as you know, and others may or may not know, Friends of Chatham Waterways also does freshwater testing for a different set of criteria, looking mostly at cyanobacteria. But looking at the data you have from both Writers Cove and the new data that you are beginning to collect for frost fish, I am curious as to whether it would be useful to consider doing some testing of similar parameters for Stillwater and Lovers Lake, which is part of kind of a water network there. And if you could do similar testing of freshwater using same criteria, or would you have to use totally different criteria? Or is it worth thinking about? Because we could certainly add it if it would be a contribution to seeing from Riders Cove to Stillwater to Lovers Lake to Frostfish. Thank you. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, well, those two lakes are connected to the herring, to Riders Cove, definitely, and Frostfish Creek. So it would make sense. There is a long, not a long history, but there has been data collected in both of those lakes and all the other ponds in Chatham. And it does exist from, I think it's 2001 to 2008. There was the PALS program that the county ran, and water samples were collected throughout that time, and dissolved oxygen and temperature and whatnot. The problem with ponds, some of you know, is the phosphorus. Phosphorus is the limiting component. It's not the nitrogen. And so what needs to happen in the ponds is you need to decrease the phosphorus amount. And that's the element that is causing blooms and lower water quality and impacts in ponds, not the nitrogen. So you were asking, can that data be collected? You know, last year, the county started up a program again to regularly measure and pay for the sampling of ponds around the Cape. And so we did some sampling finally last year again. So here it is, 2008, and now finally water samples are being collected again by the town in 2023. So there's big, gap there. There are other groups. Center for Coastal Studies has a ponds program, AP, that's associated with APCC.
Mm-hmm.
So they've been collecting data from 2 ponds here in town, not all of them. So what your question was, can the volunteers, is this what you're saying? Can volunteers start this up and start a regular sampling program?
Yeah, that looks at similar things.
Yeah.
So why not is basically what you're saying.
Yeah. We did have some volunteers doing everything except the water collection. So they were going out maybe 2, 3, 4 times a summer to collect Secchi disc, dissolved oxygen data, temperature.
Okay.
And so from 2014 to 2017, there was a group that was organized, but I think that fell off the radar because I was working elsewhere. Bob had other stuff that was on his plate that he felt was more important to do. The ponds don't seem to change very much year after year, so you don't see this huge fluctuation year to year. So he felt that you don't need to collect a whole bunch of data. These people don't need to go out. He didn't want to waste people's time, his time, other people's time, but now, and this is my own feeling is that, yes, I think the water should be collected and analyzed from those ponds on a regular basis once a year.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We have any other questions for Sarah?
Can I stop sharing somehow, or can you?
Yeah, you could just stop your share.
How do I do that?
And I think I've tried to share my screen. Thank you, Sarah. Just so much wonderful information. I want to thank everyone for participating. Our winter webinar series continues next Saturday with about managing runoff into your gardens, planting natives. Our winter webinar series is brought to you by our members as a community service. And we're this year, in collaboration with Friends of Chatham Waterways and lots of other groups, the foundation is sponsoring our 3rd annual Earth Week. And our focus this year is on water. So our Earth Day Forum will be on April 22nd. More information to follow. If you need more info, look at our website, sign up for our newsletters, and hope that you'll join us again. Sarah, again, thank you so very much, and have a great day, everyone.
Thank you, Lauren, and I'll send out the website URL to everybody, or I guess Lauren will, okay?
Yep, I will do that.
All right. Thank you so much, you guys.
Thanks.